Hi everyone, welcome to this next video on setting up the timing on a BMW R69S. This bike is a 1965 and pretty much the same procedure for all BMW twins from the 50s and 60s. They use the same ignition system. So we're going to walk through the installation of the ignition components and then the static timing on the bench. So the first thing we're going to do is install the magneto rotor, and these two lines that are scribed on it are important. We want them to face straight up and down when we install it. When the crankshaft mark is at the S, we want to place the S timing mark right there in the window, the line, not the letter. So put the line right center in the window. And when that line is in the center of the window, we want this, one of the two scribed lines, it doesn't matter which one, to be pointing straight up. So eyeball that. And then what we're going to do is press this rotor onto the taper of the cam. And I'm using its mounting bolt. And I've also put a few washers and a couple copper washers on here to make sure we don't damage the nose of this rotor when we tighten this down. So we're going to thread this all the way in. Snug that up. And just going to make sure that the timing mark stays where it needs to be. Yep, that looks fine. And then I'm just going to tighten this down a little bit more to make sure it's seated on its taper. Don't need to go crazy on it, just enough to seat it on the taper. Remove the bolt, and then I'm just going to confirm one more time that that S line, when that line for the S is in the window, this line should be pointed straight up and down. And we are good there. So if you're off by a couple degrees, it's not a big deal. So with the magneto rotor pressed onto the cam, the next thing we can do is install the points, the coil, and that assembly. It just slips over these two mounting studs. These holes are elongated so the whole mechanism can rotate a little bit if needed. So I'm going to slip that over the studs. And then as you do that, you'll notice that there's a notch in the top of this plate. This notch needs to line up with the line in the magneto rotor, which we just installed. So in this case, it does. And that's why those holes are elongated, so you can rotate the assembly a couple degrees if you need to line those up. So the system generates the optimum spark when those lines on the rotor and this notch are lined up. That's why we do that. So I'm just going to then install the two 10mm nuts and washers that hold that. I'm not really going to tighten it down crazy or anything, just to seat it on there. Okay. There we go. Just lightly tighten those down. And then we're going to install the advance unit on the end of this. So let me just put those down. And the advance unit has a little nub on it that fits into this notch on the end of the rotor. You want to make sure it's seated all the way down like that. That's all the way seated. But before I seat it all the way down, I'm going to pull it out a little bit so I can rotate it. And what I'm going to do next is set the points gap. So as I turn this, it's opening and closing the points. And what we want to do is set the points gap, the maximum gap, to 16 thousandths. So you'll use a feeler gauge and insert it in here, and then you'll use these two screws. You'll use this screw to adjust the point gap and this screw to lock down the point gap. So we're going to set it at its widest opening here, and then we're going to adjust the point gap by turning this screw. Our point gap is way too big right now, so we're going to turn it to close that gap. Okay. That's about perfect. Then we're going to lock down the locking screw. I'll turn it a couple more times and just check. That's still a little bit bigger gap than I like. So loosen up the lock screw and adjust that down a little bit more. That feels pretty good there. Yes. So that feels good. So we're going to make sure that that locking screw is tight. And that's how I set the points gap. Points gap is important to set first. It directly affects the timing. So there's no point in trying to set your timing before you set your points gap. And points gap is important for the dwell, the amount of time the points are closed. So now that we've got the points gap set, we can seat the advance on it, seat it all the way down there, and just temporarily install the bolt. Okay, I'm not really tightening it down because at this point we're just going to do the first check the timing.